Surah 9, ayah 29 says, and make war on the al-kitab, make war on the people of the book. That's me. You're to make war upon me. Until when? Until I pay the zakat.
What's the zakat?
That means the tax.
Wow.
Which only the people of the book and those who, the pagans, the non-Muslims, the non-believers had to pay. The jizya tax and the kharaj tax is what we had to pay. The zakat means until I pay actually what Muslims pay, the zakat, which is one of the 5 pillars. Now, by that time, he said, can we change? He wanted to move on. He did not want to continue with those verses. You could see. And I said, okay, let's go to Surah 8, ayah 39. Surah 8, ayah 39 is also very specific. Surah 8, ayah 39, I'll read it to you so you can see what I'm talking about. And it says very clearly, and fight them until there is no more fitna. That means no more disbelief. And the religion will all be for Allah. You're to fight me until we all become Muslims, is what it's saying. Until we all believe in Allah. Not the Allah of the Bible, the Allah of the Quran.
Wow.
So I said, that's hugely interesting to me. Then I went to Surah 47, ayah 4. Surah 47 is also a Medinan surah. And Surah 47, ayah 4 is very clear. In fact, it's fascinating because the first 3 verses in Surah 47 define who a believer is and who an unbeliever is. And it says a believer is this, an unbeliever is this, a believer is this, an unbeliever is this. And then in verse 4, it says, so when you meet those who disbelieve, smite their necks till when you have killed and wounded many of them, then bind a bond firmly.
It doesn't sound very peaceful.
Doesn't sound very peaceful, does it?
No.
Muslims will try to say yes, but this is done in the context of war. Well, let's go on to verse 6. He who guide them and set right their state and admit them to paradise, which he has made known to them. O you who believe. So, before we do that, let's continue with verse 4. Let's back up, in fact, because you understand what I'm talking about. Thus, and I want to come on down, but if it has been Allah's will, he would himself could certainly have punished them. But in order to test some of you with others, that those who are killed in the way of Allah, this is the end of verse 4, he will never let their deeds be lost. He will guide them and set them right to their state, verse 6, and admit them to paradise. So those who are killed in the fight, in the battle, of smiting and cutting off the heads of the unbeliever, he will admit them to paradise if they should die. Remember I said in another episode before that there's no assurance of salvation?
Yes.
I lied.
There is one there.
Right there, can you see? There is assurance of salvation in verse 6 of chapter 47.
So you're telling me it's some type of reward for killing someone?
There you go. In fact, the only assurance you can have is if you die in the context of jihad, you will go straight to heaven. Now can you understand why so many young men are volunteering themselves to die in the cause of Allah? Because it's straight out of the Quran. Surah 4, ayah 76 says the same thing.
They're simply following what's written there.
It's falling right out of the Quran. That's why we have to come back to this book. Now, I've just given you, 4 or 5 verses? Do you know how many verses there are on violence in the Medinan surahs?
No
149.
Wow.
149 verses.
That's very clear.
Verse after verse after verse after verse. If you have any doubt, come up to our website. You'll see it on the bottom of the screen here.
It's not a minority. It's not something that's small, you can throw away or erase. This is a big portion. It's very clear.
This is a huge part, and it's all in the Medinan surahs. And remember, the law of abrogation stipulates that which becomes later, that which becomes after, is the most authoritative part.
Okay.
Now, let's move on, and let's say, hold on a minute. We need to be careful how we exegete verses, right? We need to be careful because in my Bible, I'm very careful that I always look at the context, and I always want to know what the author intended. A good exegesis means we need to look behind what the author intended. So we need to find out what is the author saying in these verses. We need to exegete it properly. The problem is this. Who is the author of this book?
It's supposed to be Allah, is that right?
Allah doesn't read and write, doesn't come to earth and write. Who actually wrote down these words?
Well, it was Muhammad that said
Muhammad couldn't read or write.
Well, didn't he tell his followers to?
Okay, so actually you need to go back and see who these followers are. Now that's a whole other subject we can talk about another time. Who wrote the Quran? But who is it revealed to?
To Muslims. Oh, Muhammad.
For Muhammad is the man who would be the one we need to go to see how he applied this.
That's right.
The application must come through Muhammad's example, right?
Exactly.
And remember I said, whenever I start a debate, I always ask my Muslim debater, are you going to use Muhammad as your paradigm, as your model? We need to go back to Muhammad to see how Muhammad dealt with these verses. And when you go back to Muhammad, just look at his biography. Just look at what he did between 624 and 632, the last 8 years of his life.
When you
go to Ibn Hisham and when you go to Al-Waqidi, who write the earliest biography, the Siratul Rasulullah, which is the earliest biography of the Prophet himself, you can see that he was involved with raid after raid after raid after raid after raid. He was involved in over 29 battle campaigns himself personally, and he planned another 39 on top of that.
Sounds like a general.
Absolutely. His whole life was full of violence. So the way he applied it is very clear. If he is the arbiter of Scripture, if he is the one that models Scripture, his model is not a peaceful model. Look and see what he did to the Jews living in Medina there. There were 3 Jewish tribes living in Medina. The Banu Kainuka family, the Banu Nadir family, the Banu Quraiza family. These are the 3 great Jewish tribes that basically control the commerce. That's why he was asked to come up there in 622 to arbitrate between the Jews and the Ansar. He was asked by the Ansar to arbitrate as a neutral arbiter. What did he do? He tried to make a relationship with the Jews for the first 2 years. That didn't work because they rejected him as a prophet for the 4 criteria that we talked about earlier. Once they rejected him, he rejected them. And at the Battle of Badr, the first great battle, he comes back from that battle victorious, turns on the first Jews and says, why didn't you support me? And he threw them out of Medina. So the first Banu Kainuka family were thrown out of Medina in 624. A year later, the Meccans come to retaliate against that defeat. And in 625, they had the Battle of Uhud. And the Battle of Uhud went badly against the Medinans. In fact, Muhammad was almost killed. Comes back gravely wounded, having lost the battle, proving that he could not win this battle, that God was not on his side. He was angered. He turned to the next Jewish tribe, blamed them for not supporting him, and he threw the Banu Nadir out, and they sent him packing up to Khaybar. 2 years later, in 627, the Battle of the Trenches. This is the 3rd great battle, where they dug a trench so that the Meccans could not come across. It was a stalemate battle. Neither side won. He came back angered that the Jews did not support him, and therefore he confronted the last remaining Jewish tribe, the Banu Quraiza family. After 21 days of confronting them, they could not take it any longer. He then took every one of their 800 men, all 800 men, 10 at a time, and slit their throats. Killed all 800 men one afternoon. Is this a peaceful man?
No.
Is this a peaceful way of dealing with a problem within your ranks? Were the Jews happy with that?
Of course
Absolutely not.
No.
So within 5 years of his movement up there, from 5 years of coming to Medina, from 622 to 627, he basically eradicated all the Jews. Either threw them out, cut off their throats, enslaved the women, and took the women as concubines for his men and enslaved the children.
Look, honestly, I've heard enough. I'm convinced.
Okay.
But can we now compare that to the Bible?
There we go.
Tell me, is Christianity a peaceful religion or a violent one?
Oh, we need to come back to Jesus Christ. Why is it I'm not going back to the Old Testament?
I don't know. Tell me.
Because it's not my authority. I don't go back to Moses to know how I'm to live. If I go back to Moses, I'm going to have to start sacrificing. Ouch to the goat. I'm going to have to start circumcising. Ouch to me. I'm going to have to start executing my rebellious sons. Ouch to my boys.
That's right. You're a follower of Jesus. I'm a follower of Jesus. We need to follow his example. And he told us to do that.
What does Jesus? Did Jesus ever use violence?
No.
He was hated, was he not?
Yes.
He was vilified, was he not?
Of course.
He was deceived, was he not?
Yes.
He was whipped, was he not?
Absolutely.
He had to drag that cross through the streets, did he not? He had thorns, humiliated by those thorns on his head. He was put on the cross. How did Jesus respond?
What response? He accepted it. He took it.
Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. What
That's
a
right.
contrast to Muhammad.
Wow.
You want to find peace, you better come back to Jesus Christ. Nowhere did Jesus use violence. Nowhere did he even allow those who supported him. Remember, the only time violence was ever used was by Peter. In the Garden of Gethsemane, the Jews had come to arrest him. What did he do? Peter took out a sword and cut off the ear of the servant. What did Jesus do? He immediately took the ear, put it back on the servant, turned towards Peter, and he said, Peter, put away your sword.
Wow.
Matthew 26, verse 52. For he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. There you go. It's so beautiful. Oh, I love the Bible. I love Jesus Christ. I love the gospel because the gospel of Jesus Christ is the gospel of peace.
That's true. I mean, he commanded his disciples to do what? To love one another as he had loved them. And by this, the whole world, everybody else will know that you're my disciples.
There you go.
That was a
after
new
verse after
commandment
verse.
that he had given them.
Blessed are the
Wow.
peacemakers. If someone slaps you on the one cheek, turn the other cheek. Nowhere does Jesus ever allow us to use violence. We must not use violence. Not with the new covenant, the covenant of Jesus Christ, which we fall under. All
That's
of us
very
fall
clear.
under. He is the man of peace. Now, people want peace today, do they not?
Yes.
Oh, my, everybody
They're
wants
searching for it.
If you really wanted peace, Rommel, where would you go? Would you come back to this book?
No.
Not after what you've seen.
No.
Certainly, this book is not a book of peace. Would you come back to Muhammad?
No.
How can you? If you look at
can't.
his example,
No.
look what he did to Asma, the poetess.
What?
Well, she wrote poetic verse against him when he first moved to Medina. He said, who's going to rid me of this woman? Umer, the blind disciple, goes that night and stabs her through the heart while she was suckling her baby, comes back the next morning and reports to Muhammad what he had done, and he turns to Umer and says, "Blessed are you. No longer are you Umer the blind, you are Umer the seeing." He basically
Commended him.
commended him for what he had just done. Is that the example of Jesus Christ?
No.
No. Oh, I love Jesus. Because Jesus is the model for today. 2,000 years ago, he was telling us to put away our sword. 2,000 years ago, he was telling us to love our enemies. 2,000 years ago, he was telling us to turn the other cheek. 2,000 years ago, he was saying, "Blessed are the peacemakers." And if it was good enough in the first century, it's good enough in the 21st century.
That's right.
That's our man.
Yes.
That's our revelation. And that's our model for today. You want peace?
Yes.
You better come back to Jesus. Come on home. Come on home. Isn't he great? That's why I love to talk about him.
Do Muslims know this?
I think Muslims have to realize that there's nothing that they can find wrong with Jesus.
Are they offended by him?
We'll talk about that. They're not offended by him. They're offended by what he said.
Can they see that he's a man of peace?
I'm asking Muslims today, look at Jesus anew. Come back and read his scriptures. Don't make up your mind already. If you really want peace, and I know you do, I hear you all the time saying you want peace, come on home to Jesus Christ. Come on home to his gospel. This truly is the gospel of peace, and it's for you.
Jay, thank you once again. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you for sharing this information with us. If I can just turn to our audience now and say to them, you heard Jay say it, but don't just take his authority. Don't just simply take what he said as gospel. Go back to the scriptures, read the gospels, read the New Testament, and tell me, who do you find Jesus to be? A warrior? A rebel? A renegade? Did he incite the people? Did he cause some type of riots in the streets? Or was he simply preaching peace? Everybody is searching for peace. Are you searching for peace? If you want this peace, you can find it in a person, in a relationship. Once again, as we have been saying, please listen to the things that are being spoken on this episode. And don't forget to stay in tune to the very next episode. May God bless you. Thank you very much.